There's a big misunderstanding about celiac disease and gluten sensitivity that I want to clarify in this video. So, celiac disease, it's also known as gluten sensitive enteropathy. It's a common immune mediated inflammatory disease of the small intestine caused by sensitivity to dietary gluten and related proteins in people who have a genetic predisposition. Grains are typically divided into cereal grains, which includes wheat, barley, rye, oat, rice, corn, millet, and the non-cereal grains, meaning seeds, which would include things like buckwheat, quinoa, and amaranth. The grains that contain the triggering proteins are wheat, barley, and rye. It's true that 1 in 132 children in the United States has celiac disease, which is an allergy to either glutenin or gliadin, the two proteins that make up gluten. Many people with celiac disease also happen to have type 1 diabetes, which is also a genetic condition. In fact, both of these conditions are genetic autoimmune diseases, as autoimmune diseases tend to congregate in the same patient. That's why a lot of these patients also have other autoimmune conditions, for example, vitiligo. And what's wild is that most people who have celiac disease aren't even aware of their condition. These kids and adults actually need a gluten free diet, which means they can't eat wheat, barley, or rye. But that doesn't explain why more than 70% of the adults who are gluten free don't have true celiac disease. The number of people who've become gluten free despite not actually having celiac disease has actually tripled since 2009. The new pseudo medical term is something called NCGS, or non celiac gluten sensitivity. So, what exactly is that? A common scenario is when someone has undiagnosed gastrointestinal troubles like upset stomach, feeling gassy, diarrhea, and the like. Well, when they go to eat wheat or rye or something like that, and they think to themselves, I for sure have celiac disease, so maybe they go see the gastroenterologist and they get checked for the biomarkers of celiac disease, but end up testing negative for those autoantibodies. Maybe they even end up being put on the FODMAP diet, the low fermentable oligo monosaccharide and polyol diet, usually without benefit. So, what's going on here? Well, wheat is a complex organism. It's a hexaploid, meaning 6 nuclei, instead of a diploid, meaning 2 nuclei. It's been selectively bred to cultivate certain traits, and one of those is higher gluten content, which means better bread because gluten is very sticky and it makes that bread rise better, so it's going to make for a fluffier loaf. That's one of the reasons why gluten free products don't taste as good. Wheat actually has 700 different proteins that someone could be intolerant to. Only two of them are the ones in gluten. The rest of the 698 are just as capable of generating an immune response in someone's gut. And this is why there's no biomarker in the blood that you can check for them because there's simply way too many of them. So let's say you take white blood cells from someone who has celiac disease, and then you put those white blood cells in a petri dish, and then you throw either wheat, barley, or rye, or purified gluten in that petri dish as well. So what's going to happen? Those white blood cells are going to go to war with those things that you put in there. But if you take white blood cells from someone who has wheat intolerance and then you put those in the petri dish, they're going to react to the wheat but not to the barley, rye, or purified gluten. That's why these people, they can have a beer which is made with barley without any issue. This is why this condition should be called non-celiac wheat intolerance. Today, we're suddenly seeing very high levels of non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which really makes me wonder why, considering we've been eating gluten for thousands of years without much issue. But I've seen it with my own eyes. Many of my patients feel better when they stop eating wheat. It's also interesting that many of these people have symptoms when they eat wheat products in the United States, but then they can tolerate it okay when they go to other countries like Europe or Asia. So, why would an American with wheat intolerance go to Italy and then suddenly eat the pasta there without any issue? One theory is that Roundup, the American made pesticide we spray liberally on our wheat crops, probably plays a role in many Americans' wheat intolerance. This would make sense from a geographical standpoint, as Roundup's use is much more restricted in other parts of the world. So perhaps the American gluten intolerance is really just Roundup intolerance. It's certainly plausible. Roundup, according to the WHO, is a probable carcinogen and is also theorized to harm bacterial diversity, ruining our gut health. The active ingredient in Roundup is glyphosate, which has been shown to cause increased intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut syndrome. And on a related note, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, also suspects that glyphosate may injure or kill more than 90% of the plants and animals that are protected under the Endangered Species Act. Leaky gut allows some of the contents of the GI tract to enter the bloodstream, including portions of the partially digested wheat antigens, provoking those with certain genetic susceptibilities to generate an army of antibodies targeting these antigens. This eventually leads to inflammation in the body, including gut inflammation. So, what if someone says, well, if that's the case, I'll just eat organic wheat products that haven't been sprayed with glyphosate? And that's great if they can do that. Due to the issues that came along with DDT, which was the pesticide that was eventually banned by the FDA in 1972, the food industry needed to come up with a new pesticide immediately. So along came glyphosate in 1974. It was such a big seller that by 2014, more than 800 million kilograms were sprayed worldwide on an annual basis. Now, to improve glyphosate's actions, Monsanto, who makes it, they genetically engineered corn and soy products, so those are the primary components in most processed food. They manufactured it to be Roundup ready specifically so that their growth wouldn't be inhibited and therefore they could be able to produce way more food. But here's the problem. The active ingredient in glyphosate is called N-phosphonomethylglycine, which is a derivative of glycine, the smallest amino acid found in proteins. The glyphosate is taken up by the plant, then incorporated into the structure of the newly formed plant proteins instead of glycine, not human proteins, this is the plant we're talking about, and then it subsequently inhibits the enzymatic pathways that can turn simple carbohydrates into complex aromatic amino acids, namely phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan. Now remember, phenylalanine and tryptophan are essential amino acids, which means you have to eat them, and tyrosine comes from phenylalanine, meaning glyphosate-treated crops are going to be low in these amino acids, and these are the amino acids that are necessary to make the neurotransmitters serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, so you could see how this could potentially affect your brain chemistry. Glyphosate can also be problematic in other ways. In animal studies, glyphosate appears to alter methylation, which leads to epigenetic changes, which can not only lead to obesity and subsequent offspring, it can also lead to cancer, at least in animals. It was enough for the WHO in 2015 to classify it as a probable carcinogen in humans. Since then, the United States courts have had more than 40,000 class action lawsuits against the company Bayer, which bought the company Monsanto back in 2018, the makers of Roundup. In 2020, Bayer settled all of its glyphosate class action lawsuits for $10 billion, but somehow it's still being sold worldwide. So perhaps someone has true celiac disease, or they have non-celiac wheat intolerance, or maybe it's nothing more than glyphosate wreaking havoc in their gut. Or it could be something else entirely, as there are thousands of chemicals we put in our body on a daily basis that have the potential to be harmful, which is something that I get into more detail in this video right here.